Why McCoy Tyner and Herbie Hancock?
Well, I personally believe that if you're a jazz pianist today, that you can't, that you owe some debt to those two people, as well as, I mean, a whole host of others, but just in terms of modern jazz piano, I think they're two of the greatest figures. And whether you are directly influenced by them or not, that's another story. There are many pianists these days who are sort of making a conscious effort not to show the influence of those two people. Now, it just so happens that I've been influenced by those people so much that even now, I mean, I'm making a conscious effort to sound like myself. Mm-hmm. However, I wouldn't have much to play without those two gentlemen, and of course I've checked out the things that they checked out, mm-hmm. To an extent. So they're just a part of my relationship with jazz, mm-hmm. and there was a time that I sounded so much like McCoy Tyner, or at least was trying to sound like McCoy Tyner so much that one of the first bands I was in, the leader of the band wrote a tune called Colligan's Groove, which was really should have been called McCoy Tyner's Groove. It was set up so that I could explore my inner McCoy Tyner. So so those two guys, and you could compare and contrast them, because in some ways they're very similar. They were both prodigies, uh-huh. but in kind of different ways. Herbie was more of a classical prodigy originally, and McCoy Tyner, it's funny. I'm not sure exactly. I assume that he studied some kind of classical. I know he did percussion, mm-hmm. maybe before he was serious about piano. But they both kind of became sidemen very early, and then both great composers. Both have composed music that we all play. Both are very identifiable. Both have a lot of imitators. Both kind of their careers came to some kind of fruition during the 60s. It's arguable that to me, I see as sort of like the big four of what we call modern jazz piano, even though it's not modern anymore, but it's more of a, it's sort of like post-Bill Evans, if you will.
Yes.
You take McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, and Keith Jarrett, and those are the big four to me. I mean, there's others in there, but those are kind of maybe the most important and arguably the most successful. So...
Who did you discover first, and was it like lightning hitting you, or what was that discovery like?
I discovered them both, I would say, around the same time, because there were three records that were really important to me, mm-hmm. And I may have mentioned this before. I've mentioned it a bunch. One was Clifford Brown, The Beginning and the End. Mm-hmm. Which is a trumpet record that's unrelated to this. And then the second record was Herbie Hancock, Headhunters. Uh-huh. Then the third record was John Coltrane, My Favorite Things. Uh-huh. And so, obviously, Herbie's record, featured Herbie, and the Coltrane record featured McCoy Tyner. And the one I listened to the most was just the My Favorite Things, where his solo on that is really much more... meditative. He doesn't do uh-huh. sort of his signature right-hand explosive, uh-huh. Sheets of sound kind of thing. So that was my first exposure to McCoy Tyner was in kind of a rhythmic, harmonic, meditative way. Uh-huh. So it wasn't until I started listening to the other tunes on the record that I started to really notice. Uh-huh. More of the McCoy Tyner signature sound. And then, you know, I branched out from there, and the more Coltrane I listened to from that period, the more I started to really become enamored with certainly his comping. And I think that's one important thing. I don't think that as a young pianist, or as as any kind of pianist who's playing jazz these days, you can't ignore the impact of Herbie Hancock and McCoy Tyner on the way that piano fits into a jazz band. You know,
it's interesting that you came up on Herbie later and not in the Maiden Voyage period. It must have been quite a discovery to go back and hear
absolutely.
that stuff. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm trying to think, because I remember at some point I heard because this is the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, my parents were not musicians, so I came to a lot of stuff just from a neighbor had records, and they were into a few things, but they were not really into the hip jazz the way other people were. So I got to a lot of stuff. You know, I missed all the 70s music and a lot of the really hip stuff. So, but I do remember in the 80s, and I don't remember what year it was, but when, what's the tune? Da 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 da.
Oh yeah. Rocket.
Yeah. So I heard Rocket on the radio, and the DJ, he said, "Yeah, that was Herbie." So I thought it was a band called Herbie, and I was like, what is that? You know, and then I found out it was Herbie Hancock, and then of course I started to kind of put everything together.
So how do you approach a tribute? I mean, especially considering all the different sides of Herbie Hancock. You know, McCoy Tyner is one thing, and he's kind of been consistent, but Herbie's been so different over the years. How do you approach this tribute?
Well, the way I'm going to do it with Herbie is I'm basically going to take some of the arrangements from this recording that I did for Chesky Records. This was, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. And we did basically a Herbie Hancock tribute. And we did a lot of the tunes that people know, some of the tunes that people don't know. I actually did an arrangement of Rocket. I'll probably pull that out for this gig. And it's sort of more of a retro version of that tune. And there's some other maybe more obscure.
We have somebody scratching?
No, definitely not. Well, that's maybe I'll be scratching. But so I'm basically going to take from that. That's sort of a no-brainer because that music has barely been played. We did 2 events at the Iridium in New York with that repertoire besides the recording, and we used pretty much the same band. We had. I was fortunate to get Buster Williams, Lenny White, both of whom actually worked with Herbie. I mean, Buster and Herbie were, you know, they spent a lot of time together. And I got Steve Wilson to do that recording. And it didn't really do much because Chesky is more of it's like a niche market. It's like for audiophiles. Like we did it in this church, and they had us sort of all gather around this one microphone, this one head, like super, you know, whatever, I guess it was a condenser microphone or something, you know, some kind of really, so that's, with the Herbie thing, that's how I'm dealing with that. With the McCoy Tyner thing, I'm going to try to take maybe from a few different albums of his, and some familiar material, some not so familiar, and we'll try to stretch out. The band is a really good band that we're going to have for this gig, so I think it's kind of, whatever we play is just going to take care of itself. You know what I mean? We have David Valdez on alto. We have a young tenor player named Nicole Glover, who's actually a student here at Portland State University, and she's coming on really strong. And then we have what I call the 2 Chris's. We have Chris Higgins on bass, who just recently moved here. He's from Eugene originally, and he lived in New York for a little longer than I did, I think. Maybe 17 years or so, with a few detours to Barcelona. And then we have Chris Brown, who is the son of the great Mel Brown, and I can't say enough about Chris Brown. I mean, he plays alto really well, and I mean, he's on this gig, he's on drums, but he's a fantastic alto player and a really good piano player. I don't know what else he plays. I hope he plays nothing else, but you know, we might switch it up. In fact, I'm pretty sure we will, because we've been doing that lately. He plays piano, I play drums, and it's totally happening. Maybe I'll ask him to bring his alto. It's seamless, you know.